Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evan Wittenberg. I work in leadership development as part of Google University, and it's my pleasure to welcome Bill George here today to our 8th Leading at Google speaker series. The point of this series is to bring in experts and practitioners from the outside to help us learn more and more about leadership and how we can apply it to our unique context at Google. Bill is a professor of management practice at Harvard Business School, and he's also the Henry B. Arthur Fellow of Ethics there. He teaches leadership and leadership development to the MBA students. He's the author of 2 best-selling books. One is Authentic Leadership, Rediscovering the Secrets of Creating Lasting Value. And the other that some of you were lucky enough to get today is called True North, Discover Your Authentic Leadership. Mr. George is the former chairman and CEO of Medtronic in the 10 years of his role of chief executive officer there from 1991 to 2001. He took Medtronic's market capitalization from $1.1 billion to $60 billion in those 10 years. He currently serves as director of ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, and Novartis. Received his BS in industrial engineering with high honors from Georgia Tech and his MBA with high distinction from Harvard University, where he was also a Baker Scholar. I'm very excited to be welcoming Bill George to speak to us today. Bill.
Thanks, Evan. Thank you, Evan. It's exciting to be here and share some thoughts with you, and I hope not to talk too long so we can have time for comments and dialogue, questions. It's also nice to be 3,000 miles west of Wall Street because I've had, on Goldman Sachs, where I've had 9 meetings in the last 3 weeks. I keep looking at my cell phone to see if they're going to call one this afternoon with things seem to be careening out of control. And to get back to the real world, where innovation and creativity really takes place. So I'd like to talk to you today about, 21st century leadership and what it's going to take to build a company. In many ways, Google may be the model of that company, and I'd like to think that this is the way one builds an authentic organization, because far too often in our country we've had people going the other way, and it's destroyed tremendous amount of value for companies and for our society, and I have great concerns. So I'd like to think that maybe Google is going to be the model for resurgence of the U.S. economy, because the reality is we're in trouble. And so as I go into this, I'd like you to think about not just what I'm talking about philosophically, but think about your own leadership and what are you doing to sustain the growth of this organization and to enable it to fulfill its mission. That's the first question. What are you doing to sustain the growth of this organization, enabling it to fulfill its mission? That's the first question. The second question is, how are you developing yourself as a leader? Because I think we're all called to be leaders. I don't think leadership is something that you get a title, you're a vice president or a director or a manager or CEO or something like that. We all have an opportunity to exercise leadership every day. And as I go on, you'll understand that I really think that we've had basically a flawed notion of leaders and followers, a leader on top and the follower following on. But let me just comment a little bit on, just for your information or your thoughts about what I see going on a broader level in the country, because we are facing the worst economic and fiscal crisis clearly since 1929. There's a few people trying to hold it together with baling wire to make sure the whole system doesn't unravel. There are a couple major meetings this weekend of the finance ministers from around the world and the World Bank meeting in Washington, and things are really not in good condition. You'd have to ask how we got in here. I see it very much as a failure of leadership. I don't think these things just happen. I think we had too many leaders willing to risk their institutions and wind up putting the country at risk. I was talking to my successor at Medtronic today, and he was saying he just happened to mention he had $4 billion in cash sitting on the books. And I said, well, that's a nice position to be in because all these Wall Street firms are operating on a 30 to 35-1 model of debt to equity. And so they're right on the precipice at all times of going under. But I think beyond that, what we really saw is a failure of leadership to focus on the number one goal is for an organization to be viable or survivable, and second, to sustain its position, sustain its growth. And I think leaders very much took short-term shortcuts and short-term goals to in part to achieve short-term results, but also to feather their own nests, and they've put their organizations at risk. And I think it was largely because we were choosing the wrong leaders to lead these institutions. We were choosing people more for charisma than for their character. We're choosing more for their style than their substance, more for their image than their integrity. And when you choose people for the wrong qualities, you're going to get a lot of bad things happening to you. And I think we were just choosing a lot of not very authentic people, powerful people, admittedly, smart people, but not people that were really committed to the enterprise. And they were what I would characterize as takers rather than givers. By that I mean they were really in it for themselves. They were in to see how much money, fame, power, and glory they could get out of the organization. As Peter Drucker once said, leadership is responsibility. And I really believe that. I think each of us has a responsibility to each other as we lead to do the right thing for the organization, to ensure its success, not just our own success. It's all too easy to fall back on what you want. And so in so doing, we've seen failure after failure of major financial institutions. With them, they take a lot of other things down with them. And ultimately, you can take the whole system down. It is interesting, and I'm not trying to promote Goldman Sachs, I'm on the board, but its model of leadership is much more like the way I understand the Google model, because tremendous number of very bright, talented individual contributors who interact very well as teams, and an executive team that's extremely involved in the business all the time. And it wasn't like Goldman Sachs didn't get into a lot of the bad things other people did. They did. They got out of subprime mortgages in the first quarter of 2007, which in retrospect, at the time they were feeling pretty chagrined about being in it, but at the time, if you look back on that, they made the move. So I think people do make mistakes, but I think the key is, are you really engaged to know, are you doing the right thing? Are you on top of the business, and are you fully engaged? The challenge for Google, as I see it, is as you're smaller, you can be very much on top of things, but how does it work as you grow? And I think that's the real challenge. If you look at a Microsoft and what's happening to it, you wonder why they haven't had any innovations. They have a lot of very, very smart people. And I think there is a theorem that suggests size and creativity are inversely proportional. And that's kind of a scary one. The only way I can do that is you keep dividing organizations organically into smaller and smaller organizations to enable others to grow. But organizations do develop, if you will, a bureaucracy, and they become top-heavy, and the growth stops. And so I think one of the great challenges for Google is, how do you avoid that as you grow? As you go from 14,000 employees to 140,000 employees, how do you keep that level of creativity? How do you keep that level of enthusiasm, a level of passion? And as you spread out around the globe, as you have people all over doing things, how do you keep that same level of, if you will, sense of we're really making a difference, that sense of innovation, that sense of creativity that I've seen so many organizations lose over time? I used to look at Hewlett-Packard back in the 70s and 80s as my role model of how you build an organization. And somehow the air went out of the balloon because they, in a sense, maybe lost some of the essence of what they were. And so I think it's really important to know what that essence is and to keep it alive. And I think that requires a leadership model which is sustainable and is viable. I think this is vitally important for the U.S. economy, because back in the 90s we had it going pretty well, and then we shifted to much more of a, if you will, a consumer spending model. The idea was to get consumers to spend more to save less. I was telling you something from China the other day. They said the savings rate in China is close to 50% now. Well, here it's minus 1%. So, and it's great to say, well, we traded in our credit cards on a subprime mortgage, but those things come back to bite you. And I think can be very, very destructive. And so we've had a spending model rather than a creation model. And there's been a lot of talk about, jobs in Detroit. I grew up in Michigan. What's happening to automobile workers' jobs? Hey, that industry, the old Detroit is gone. It's dead. You may have automobiles produced other places. Textiles, T-shirts that you're wearing are not going to be produced in North Carolina in the future. The only hope for the United States economy, in my opinion, is innovation and creativity. This is still by far the most creative nation on earth, and this is the most creative place. I've been to most of the leading centers of creativity and innovation. And so I think we have to, the key is creating new companies, seeing companies formed like this one was not so long ago, and continue to create vital new companies. To shift to another industry, look what happened to the big pharma industry when Genentech came in with a new model, not dissimilar to your own, and started turning out more drugs in a 5-year period than the entire U.S. pharmaceutical industry did combined, with a research budget about a tenth of the size. Pfizer's got a research budget. I was there the other day. They've got a research budget of $7.5 billion a year, and they haven't produced a new drug in 4 years. And you can say it was bad luck, or you can say it was the wrong kind of culture. But I do think culture and leadership very much go hand in hand. And I think the integration has got to be worked on every day. In other words, you have to have a dynamic model of that leadership. And I think that is the future of the U.S. economy, is to have many, many new companies spawned, started up, and created. There was an excellent article in New York Times Magazine on Sunday talking about Kleiner Perkins and the energy industry and how many new energy companies. I'm on the board of ExxonMobil, and everyone says, why don't you guys go create new forms of solar energy and wind? It's not going to come from the big companies. They're going to do their job in oil and gas, but the future is going to come from new companies starting up. Maybe they should invest in them, but I think this model is the most viable and vital model for our country, not just for all of you. And I hope you can be a role model of how to do that. Well, let me talk a little bit about how I see 21st century leaders. I was raised in a different era when we had very much a hierarchical model of organizations. And we still do in many, many parts of the world and many, many parts of this country. We're using a hierarchical model. And I think it's flawed at its core because it doesn't really excite the kind of people you have in organizations today, because people in organizations like this one have changed and are very, very different than what we used to look at 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so those companies that don't adapt to a new organizational model really do so at their peril. So what do I mean by that? Well, we used to have a leader-follower model coming out of 2 world wars and a Great Depression. It was follow the great general like General George Patton over the hill. That's not happening. That won't work today. The reason it won't work is because people, and not just your organization, but other organizations have changed as well. First of all, we have knowledge workers. Every person in this organization is a knowledge worker, and if the people working for you in the organization don't know more than you do, you better get some people who do. The second reason is that people don't want to wait in line to have their opportunities. They want to lead now, and I think our job is to create opportunities for them to lead. I was the president of a Litton microwave oven division at age 27. Somebody gave me that opportunity. It was small. It was only 10 million sales, a couple hundred people. We grew it to about 200 million. But I made a lot of mistakes. We made a lot of mistakes, but we also did a lot of creative breakthrough kinds of things in starting a whole new industry back in 1970. That can be done, and I think that people today are not going to wait in line to get the opportunity. And so I think we need to create models and opportunities for them to have their opportunity. Now, I'm not talking about something like the French bank Société Générale did, where some trader took them down $7.5 billion. I'm not suggesting it. You put the whole company in the hands of one person. But I do think we need to create opportunities because people have options. My students at Harvard, probably people in this room, are going to change jobs 6 to 8 times during their lifetime. I'm not advocating that. I hope you spend your whole career here. But people, if they don't have opportunities, they'll move on. They're not. It's not like the old motto where they come to work at age 22 and stay till 62 and then go out and retire. So that has changed. But more than that, the economists told us for many years that people are only interested in money. I think we all want to do well financially, but I think that's not what's motivating people today. I think people want to find meaning and significance in their work. Every one of us in this room, is spending more time working than we do anything else. More time than we do sleeping, more time than we do with our families, more time than we have in leisure time. So don't you have a right, and doesn't everyone who works with you or for you have a right to that kind of meaning and significance in their work? I would contend you do. And I think it's our job to provide that sense of meaning and purpose in our work. At Medtronic, the most significant day of the year was our holiday party. It was not the annual shareholders meeting. And that was the day we brought 6 patients in to tell their stories of how they'd gotten a Medtronic product in the last year. They were representative of the 10 million people who'd received Medtronic products. I'll never forget the first one I went to 19 years ago, back in 1989. I just joined the company. And the founder told me to keep an eye out on a young man who was coming in that day. It turned out the product he'd gotten, the company had decided to phase out. I'll go into that in a minute. But we heard 5 patients come up. One of them was a man in his 50s who actually got up on the stage and started telling his story. He started to break down crying because he had had chronic back pain. He had failed back surgery 4 times. And he had said he had become a drug addict. He'd become addicted to alcohol and addicted to drugs. And he had never known a day in 10 years that he hadn't had pain until he got his Medtronic stimulator in his spinal column. And he said the pain went away, and he said it was just an amazing experience. And he was basically, it wasn't, this kind of thing that everyone said, he was very much moved by his story. And then the sixth person came up was a young boy from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, named T.J. Flack. I'll never forget him because he was the same age as my son Jeff, who was 18, but that's where the similarity ends. T.J. was born with cerebral palsy, and he described how he'd had surgery to relieve the growing cerebral palsy in his body every year. So he'd get out of school, and he'd have surgery, go on a body cast for 8 weeks, and by the time he got done with his surgery, or body cast, they put him back into school. And he said at 16, he said, no more surgery. That's the end. I can't handle any more of this. And of course, a terrible disease like that, his body became very stiff and rigid, and his speech patterns were such that he could barely talk. He had to be in a wheelchair. His parents had to pull him out of a mainstream school. He said it would take him an hour to get out of bed in the morning. As an 18-year-old, his mother had to dress him, which he said was rather embarrassing. So basically, he had no life. And then he said he linked up with this doctor at Pittsburgh Children's Hospital who implanted a Medtronic drug pump in his abdomen, and that had a drug baclofen that went into his spinal column. And he said, it changed my life. And he patted his drug pump, and he said, this is my friendly ally. And he said, now I'm back in a mainstream school. I'm out of the wheelchair. I just have arm braces. I still have cerebral palsy, but I'm going to college next year. I have a girlfriend. I can dress myself. I have a life. And I had tears in my eyes as I was listening to him. And I looked at the guy next to me, he had tears in his eyes too, so I thought it was okay. But I got it. And there wasn't anyone in that room that day that didn't understand why they're working with it. If they worked in the accounting department, they worked in the IT department, they knew what their job was, to help people like TJ be restored to a full life, no matter what role they had in the company. And so you couldn't argue that there wasn't meaning and significance there. Some people say, well, that's easier in the medical business, you save lives. That's true. But what about non-medical companies? Let me just share an experience from a friend of mine who runs Kroger, if you can think of a company that does not, obviously not save any lives, a guy named Dave Dillon. And he tells a story about how Kroger was really losing the game to Walmart. They had a 15% cost disadvantage, and how people were totally demoralized. And he said he tried to find alignment around the idea of, he said he had gained alignment around the proposition serving the public in a service-oriented grocery operation is a dignified, proud profession. All human beings want to find meaning in their lives. Our objective is to help give them that meaning. We have the opportunity to make customers' lives better by making them feel good about the world around them because someone was friendly to them. Little touches of human kindness can literally change the day. If I'm the person that's delivering that human kindness, I wind up feeling better about myself. And at the end of our careers, we can look back and say, I was part of something special. Well, think about your own work. Are you part of something special? Are you, through your work, really making a difference and fulfilling the mission of delivering information to people all around the world? I saw that globe out there, and some parts of the world there's a lot of information, and there's others where people don't have access to it. And what is the mission that you find you're fulfilling in your work, and you feel aligned with the company's mission? Because I do think that in terms of thinking about leadership, we need to think about people who can provide that kind of inspiration and empowerment to people throughout an organization. So let me suggest to you that the new definition for leadership, which I can define in 4 words: align, empower, serve, and collaborate. Let me describe what those mean. First of all, alignment. First job of any leader is to align people around a mission and values. The academics at Harvard say this is the soft side of leadership. I think it's the hard side. I think the easy side is getting the numbers right. I don't think it's hard to get the numbers right in any organization in the short term. Anyone can play that game. But getting people aligned around a mission, particularly as an organization like Google becomes a truly global company. I've watched Medtronic go from 4,700 people to 40,000 and people all over the globe. How do you get that level of alignment? How do you know that their culture of Google in India or Albania is more important than the culture they were raised with in a sense of their commitment to the company? That level of alignment to mission and values is critical to bring people into that. It's harder than you think as an organization grows to achieve that level of alignment. And I've watched an organization like Johnson & Johnson, which is a very large organization. It's amazing how they have that level of alignment around the globe because they're always talking about the shared mission, the shared set of values they have in the organization. So it's obvious when somebody asks you for a bribe in Greece, what you do. or even if a doctor asks you to take them out for a little cruise, you know what to do because you know what the rules of the game are. The second thing is empowerment. I think the idea of the leader having power over everyone, and if I give my power away to you, I've reduced my power, is a flawed notion of leadership. So I'd like to suggest to you that we need to get rid of the idea of leaders are people who have power, but leaders being people who know how to empower other people, how to get them inspired to step up and lead. And oftentimes people who have the most influence in an organization have no direct reports, but they're really, truly empowered people. Remember, I was visiting a Medtronic facility down in Southern California, in Irvine, that made heart valves. And it was what you do is you basically take a pig's heart, you carve out the pig's valve from the heart. About 1 out of 10 pig's hearts can produce a valve that can be used in a human being to replace a damaged or destroyed atrial or mitral valve. It's a very complicated, more of an art than a science, complicated process. The company was heavily backlogged, took about 18 months to train employees. So I was trying to figure out how can we do this faster, how can we make it more scientific. And I remember sitting down and going out to the bench of the woman who was the highest producer in the plant, a woman named Trin, who happened to be an immigrant from Laos about 5 years before. And so I asked her how she did her work, and so she wouldn't even look down at her bench. She said, "Mr. George, let me tell you something. My job is to make heart valves that save someone's life. And if I do my job well, they live, and if they don't, there's a risk they may die. So I'm the inspector on the line. There are no inspectors on this line. I make the entire valve, and if my criteria for whether it goes out of here, is it good enough to put in my father or my husband or my daughter? And if it is, it leaves. If it isn't, it won't go out of here." She said, "You know, I make 1,000 valves a year. If one of those valves is defective, someone's going to die. I could never live with that. To you at Medtronic, 99.9% quality may be good enough, but that would never be good enough for me." She said, "But when I go home at night, what I'm thinking about are those 5,000 people who are walking around living full lives in the world today because of the heart valves I made." Now, can anyone doubt that she's a leader? Because she's the one that is giving guidance to all the other employees in the plant. She's setting the quality standards. She's doing training sessions, yet she has no direct reports. And so I think this is a model of leadership which is very, very different than the traditional hierarchical model. It's really an empowered model. She is very much an empowered person. She knows her job. No one's going to second guess her decisions on quality. And I think if we think of it that way, we can unlock the full power of an organization by having people empowered throughout. And I will guarantee you that organizations who empowered people are going to defeat any organization with a hierarchical tops-down model that operates by rules and regulations. Of course, you have to have a glue that sets the values, but I think empowerment is the key. The third thing is service. You know, we were told for a long time by the economists our job is to maximize shareholder value. I would contend to you, any organization focused on maximizing shareholder value will destroy itself. It will self-destruct. The only way you create sustainable value for shareholders is to create sustainable value for your customers. That is the key. And the organization will be successful if those who know how to sustain that value over the long term for their customers. That's what motivates people. That's what motivates you all, is creating great products that people can use. And that's how you get an organization of motivated people, not by focusing on shareholder value, and that's where the ultimate shareholder value comes from. The shareholder value can be sustained when you have that level of service model. So our job is not to serve the shareholders, it's really to serve the customers. And whether we're working in direct customer contact or indirect, all of us have that responsibility. And then finally, I think as organizations, we have to know how to collaborate. What does that mean? We used to think, I can do it myself. Well, the challenges today are so great. If you think about the great problems of the world we're trying to solve, energy and the environment, healthcare, education, global peace, poverty throughout the world, the only way these things can be solved is through collaboration. Collaborations of corporations with each other, with corporations with governments, collaboration of corporations with nonprofit organizations. If you want to solve a problem like AIDS in Africa, you can't just give AIDS drugs to some organization. You'll never get to the people that need them. You don't get it until it gets in someone's mouth. That requires NGOs. It requires cooperation in governments. So my thought about 21st century organization is we have the leaders of the future at all levels of organization are ones that can align people around a mission and values, can empower people to step up and lead, understand that leading is about serving customers, and finally know how to collaborate across organizational lines. Well, we went out and tried to find what kind of leaders, what can we learn from leaders about how they developed and what was really key to their leadership. My colleagues at Harvard said, I hope you'll finally figure out what are the traits, characteristics, competencies, successful leaders. Well, we went out and talked to 125 leaders, and it was interesting, none of them talked about that at all. What they wanted to talk about is their life stories and the challenges they'd faced in their life that gave them the passion to lead. So think about your own life story. Where do you find your own passion lead? What's really calling you to do the work? What makes you excited about getting out and coming to work every day? Where is that passion? Where's that excitement? Because in that is locked inside your leadership. One of the people we talked to was Howard Schultz, who founded Starbucks. And I don't know if you know Howard's story, but he grew up in Brooklyn and the Bayview housing projects in a very, very poor, lower class environment with a lot of crime and a lot of drugs. And he tells the story of how he came home one day and found his father on the sofa with a body cast on. And Howard's father had slipped on the ice that day. He got fired from his job. He lost his health care and he lost his pension. And the Schultzes had no money. They had nowhere to go. His mother couldn't go back to work. She was 7 months pregnant. His job as a kid was to talk to the people, the bill collectors calling in him, tell him his parents weren't there when they were sitting right in front of him arguing about how to pay the bills. Howard said he saw his father lose 30 jobs. He said he had 30 rotten jobs. He said, I thought my father was a terrible failure. I couldn't wait to go to Northern Michigan University, which I never heard of, on a football scholarship, which he lost the first year because he injured his shoulder. He said, but the saddest day of my life was the day my father died, because that was the day I realized my father wasn't a failure. He never had a shot. And from that time on, I wanted to create a company where he'd be proud to work. And that's why he went out and founded Starbucks. And he said, ever since then, I've had the dream of creating a company where my father would be proud to work. He actually almost lost Starbucks. He had put together a group of investors, interesting story. And one of these people he called a titan of Seattle. And at a certain point in time when they're about ready to go forward with it, the guy stepped in front of him and said, Howard, I'll take this whole deal. It's only $3 million. I'll do the whole investment. And Howard said, I could see my dream going away. So he hired Bill Gates Sr., Bill Gates' father, who was a lawyer, to go up and confront this guy. And they went up to the tallest office building in Seattle, the top floor. And there the guy turned around and confronted them. He said, Schultz, if you don't take my deal, I'll make sure you never get another job in this town. You'll be dog meat. And Howard said he went down the lobby and broke into tears because he could see his dream going away. But he was able to get another group of investors and had the tenacity to put it back together again, and the rest, they say, is history, because he's gone from 3 stores to 16,000. But now I think you're probably aware he's gone back into Starbucks because they were losing the dream. But he also has a dual motivation. He's also driven by fear. Here's a guy that has the dream of what he wanted to create, but also that fear of failure he's been carrying around with his father. So you can see buried in his life story is that sense of using Starbucks and his work to really make a difference in the world through his work. Many of the leaders we talked to, most of them, at one time in their life, they experienced some form of crucible, a really difficult time. One of those was Randy Comazar, who had been very successful with LucasArts, with George Lucas, but he was always wanting to run the place and always fighting with George. So he went to an organization like Crystal Dynamics, and he actually failed. And he had to confront his own failure and realize that he was just chasing the money, and he didn't like the work. He was in the wrong place. He didn't buy into the mission of the company. And so he realized at a certain point in time the conflict was raging inside of him between a father who grew up poor and feeling like he really needed a lot of money, and a grandmother who had wonderful values and taught him about how to make a difference in the world. And these two things were always conflicting for Randy. So he just quit cold turkey. He went, got a Buddhist monk that taught him meditation, and he went on a meditation retreat for a long period of time and really reflected on what he wanted to do. And he wound up now at Kleiner Perkins. In fact, he was featured in a New York Times article as a guy who could help the energy industry going by get a lot of entrepreneurs started up in energy and really helping work with them. And now he's really feeling fulfilled. He's a great guy, but he's fulfilling that sense of passion through his work. And he's finally resolved these conflicts that go deep, deep inside him. And I think we all have in us, a story. We each have our story, and what is it that really is important to us. In my own case, my father was a consultant I thought successful. He thought he was a failure, and he wanted me to be CEO of a large company, even named the companies, suggested I could be CEO of Coca-Cola or IBM or Procter & Gamble, which is a pretty heavy trip for a little kid. And when I was a kid, I was never the one chosen to do any kind of leadership, even though my father said, "You're going to be this great leader, son." Well, I was never captain of the tennis team, never elected student council, never head of any organization. So finally, my senior year, I decided, okay, to heck with it, I'm going to run for president of senior class, which I did. I lost by a margin of 2-1. So it's pretty clear no one saw me as a leader in my high school, so I went about 800 miles away to college, and I'm going to get a fresh start, and still thinking I wanted to be a leader. I ran for office 6 more times, lost all 6. So it's pretty clear that no one sees me as a leader. So now being 0 for 7, finally the best thing ever happened to me is some seniors in my high school or college pulled me aside and said, "Bill, no one's ever going to work with you because you're moving so fast, you're so aggressive, you don't really have time for anyone else." And so I took that to heart and tried to change. It was pretty painful, I can tell you, to get that kind of negative feedback. But I tried to take that feedback, go back and talk to some of the people that have been opposing me and get their honest feedback about that. And I was fortunate enough to have a lot of leadership positions later on in college and then in graduate school. And then in my 20s, I had 2 experiences that really brought me to grounded me in what I call the marrow of life, or what life really is all about. The first was, although I'd never been close to my father, I was very close to my mother. And I was in Washington, D.C. I thought I had the world by the tail, working in the Department of Defense, and very excited about life. And my father called to say my mother had died that morning of a heart attack. And I realized in mourning her death that she was a leader I should have been looking at all along, but because of my own gender bias and the fact that she'd been in a volunteer organization, she'd stopped work when I was born, and then she did volunteer. She was the leader of everything she ever took over. But I didn't see that. But I recovered from her death. I fell in love, got engaged to be married, and my fiancée was come back to her home in Georgia to prepare for the wedding. I remember talking to her on a Saturday night and make final plans for the wedding. And the very next day, her parents called me to say that she died that morning of a malignant brain tumor. And I was just devastated, because even though I could explain my mother's death as being in the natural order of things, much as I missed her, there's no way I could explain the loss of a 25-year-old who was doing such great work and had such great potential. And even though I'm a person of faith, I had no basis for saying, why did these things happen in our lives? And I finally decided, none of us, and I would say this to each of you, bad things don't always happen to bad people. A lot of times bad things happen to good people, and life is not always fair. None of us knows how long we have to be on this earth. And I decided all I can do is try to make a difference in the lives of people I touch or interact with every day, to slow down a little bit, which is not my normal style, and to try to make each environment I go into a little bit better, no matter how long or how short a period of time I'm there. But I still wanted to be CEO. I thought I was on that track. I went to Honeywell, was head of Honeywell Europe, got a 2-step promotion, the worst promotion I ever got, and I got a series of turnarounds at Honeywell. It was a big bureaucratic organization. I thought I could tame it and make it more dynamic, more in the image I wanted. And finally, after my 3rd set of turnarounds, I never got to stick around because I'm a builder. I like to see things grow and build. I kept getting moved to all these things where all I was doing was the guy cutting them back, Mr. Fix-It. In fact, I used to say, I'm not the guy that got the organization in this position. I'm just the guy that's trying to fix it. But I was driving home one day on a beautiful day like today, and looked at myself in the rearview mirror of my car, and I was miserable. Now, this time I've met my wife Penny a year after my fiancée died. I've been married for, at that time, about 20 years. I had 2 wonderful sons, great community. How can you be miserable? You got a good job. I was miserable because the company was changing me in ways I didn't like about myself. Or I should say, I was changing in response to playing the game of becoming CEO, of taking on a leadership role. And I realized I really didn't like what was happening to me, and I was getting away from the value-centered leader I thought I was called to be. So I went home, talked to my wife, and told her all these things, and she says, I've been trying to tell you this for a year, you just didn't want to listen. So it's always the person closest to us that understands us and sees through our blind spots that we don't want to see about ourselves. So at that point in time, I called Medtronic back and said, I'd been asked 3 times to join Medtronic as president, chief operating officer. And why did I turn it down? I think it was because I thought it was too small an organization, and I didn't realize its potential to really grow. And so I called him back, and fortunately, founder and I met, and the then CEO and I met, and I wound up becoming president of the company with the opportunity to become CEO a couple of years later. And I remember going into the company for the first time, and I bet this is a feeling many of you have had coming here. I felt like I was coming home, even though I'd never been inside the company before. I just felt like this is a place I ought to be. I like the people. They seem to like me. We're doing really important work, and we can change the world. We can really make a difference. It's not just some bureaucratic monster that I can't deal with. And so, as honestly said, it was a blessing to be there. The 13 years I spent at Medtronic really were a blessing. It's the best 13 years of my professional life. And I look back in that experience. If I hadn't had some of those early experiences, maybe I wouldn't have been prepared for it. But I think each of us, think about your own life and the challenges you face and what you've overcome to get to this point in your life and how you can use your life to make a difference. Robert F. Kennedy once said, "Few will have the greatness to change history itself, but each of us can work to commit a small series of actions to make this world a better place. And the sum total of all those actions will be written in the history of this generation." So maybe your leaders are people that are actually bending history, but each of us is just going to make a difference. So we can make a difference in the environments we're in, and we commit to do a small series of things, but by working together, we can make this world a better place. And we certainly know that there are enough problems out there that need our attention, that need our engagement and our involvement, and we have to do our small part. We can't think, just I'm going to change, I'm going to be the Nelson Mandela that totally changes the world. So we went out and talked to these leaders about how do you change and how do you develop, not change, but how do you develop as a leader? And they gave us 5 things to think about, because what we learned is that leadership is not about the outside. It's not about the appearance, not about the style, not about all those external things. It's really about the person inside. How do you develop it? But some of you say, well, I don't really think of myself as a leader. Some of my students even say that. I said, actually you are. Each of us is going to lead in our own way. But leadership, developing yourself as a leader is very much like being an athlete. People ask the question, are leaders made or born? I think the answer is obviously you're born with certain gifts and you have to develop them. It's no different than if you're going to play the cello at Carnegie Hall or you're going to be you're going to ride the Tour de France. You're born with certain gifts, but you have to develop those every day. One of the first you have to develop is self-awareness, knowing who you are. Who am I? I heard the vice chairman of General Electric give a talk the other day. He said, if you want to get ahead in this organization, you need to let management know who you are, but you have to know who you are. Self-awareness is harder to get than you think. I think we only get it being down in the playing field and getting honest feedback. I know you have a good peer feedback system here, and there's probably no better way to know who you are than getting good, honest feedback. But it's only after you're actually in the experience. You can't do it being a consultant or sitting up in the press box or just observing leadership. You can't become a leader by observing or reading about it, reading books, or trying to follow somebody else's lead. You really actually have to do it. But I think the best tool you can get is feedback from other people, from peers, from people who work for you, from your bosses, about ways to improve. But then I think there needs to be a period of introspection. Jeff Immelt tells a story at General Electric when he was about to get fired from his job because he was missing his budget by so much. He said, leadership is a long journey into your own soul. At times like these, it's not like anyone can tell you how to do it. Sometimes you have to go into yourself and said, what do I want to be? Who am I going to be? Just like Randy Comazar did. What's really important to me here? And what are the forces that are driving me? The second thing has to do with your values. Anyone can stand up here and tell you what values you ought to have. I think that's nonsense. I think values have to do with knowing what your values are. No one can tell you what your values should be. Only you can decide what your values are. But you'll never know until they're really tested under pressure. When you feel those conflicts between values, it can take you one way or another way. There's a guy named John Huntsman we interviewed for the book who was working for President Richard Nixon back in the 70s. And he was asked to, working for the chief of staff, and chief of staff called him in and said, John, we've got a congressman out of California that's opposing President Nixon's initiatives. We want to teach him a lesson. So he owns a factory out in California. We'd like you to call this plant manager. Here's the number. Go call this plant manager. And we'd like you to get 12 illegal immigrants to go into this this congressman's plant. And then we're going to send the federal agents in on Monday and catch him in a sting operation. So John dutifully called up the plant manager and said, started instructing him what to do. And about 15 minutes, and he said, 15 minutes in the conversation, my inner moral compass made itself noticed. And I said to him, why don't you just forget I ever called? I'm not going to play this game. And he realized in that instant that he had this incredible loyalty to the President of the United States, but he also valued his integrity. And he had to make a choice. And he chose his integrity, and he went back and resigned from the White House, this excellent job he had as a 29-year-old, because he had to make the call on values. And years later, his company was about ready to go bankrupt, and he once again had to make the call. Did he declare bankruptcy, like everyone said he should, or did he just fight his way through it? And he went through significant health problems, but he avoided bankruptcy. He said, because if I declared bankruptcy, I own the company. If I borrow money from you, it would destroy my integrity as a human being. So I think those values tests come in the real world, and that's when we find out what's really important. And sometimes the values tests you have early in life translate into much bigger challenges you have later in life. Well, the third thing is what we call your sweet spot, and that's where your motivations and capabilities come together. I think all of us like the recognition of our peers. We like to have people tell us they're doing a good job. We like pay increases, salary increases, title, bonuses, all that. Those are all your extrinsic motivations. There's nothing wrong with those, but the question is, what are your intrinsic motivations? What are the things that really are important to you, like creating a great product, doing a really good job, working with a great team, developing yourself, helping mentor someone else, having a great family? These are all intrinsic motivations. The key there is, how do you balance those two things? And then put that together with your strongest capabilities. The old idea that we're going to fix our weaknesses, I think, is really flawed. The key is finding a role where you can use your greatest strengths, combine those with your greatest motivations, and that's what we call your sweet spot. And when you're operating your sweet spot, I can almost guarantee you that you'll be successful. And if you can help people that work with you and for you find a position where they're most effective, and they're operating their sweet spot, then your organization is going to be that much more successful. Well, the fourth thing is building a support team around you. Leadership can be very lonely, and I think the key is, who do we have there to support us? I think it starts with having someone in your life with whom you can be totally open and honest. For me, it's my wife, Penny. For you, it could be your spouse, significant other, best friend, mentor, or a therapist, whomever, but somebody you can be really open, that can give you straight up feedback when you need the support, or as my wife says, you're getting a little high on yourself, so it can kind of bring you back down to real world. But we need that in our life. We also need mentors. I think having a mentors are wonderful things. If you find someone with whom you had a real chemistry, that can really shoot straight with you and help you through difficult situations. I also am a great believer in support groups. We create these in my class at Harbor. We have 6-person groups. I've had a men's group of 6 guys I've been meeting with for over 30 years. We have a couples group of 8 of us, 4 couples that meet on a regular basis and just talk about life. And when my wife had breast cancer a few years ago, I could go to these groups and tell them that because of my early experiences, I was really afraid, and be honest that I was afraid of something, she wasn't going to make it through this, and they were really there for me. And when you're in trouble, as one friend said, who was CEO of a company, he said, you find out who your real friends are. When you got a big position, you think you have a lot of friends. They aren't really your friends. You can probably count your true friends on the fingers of both hands, if that. And having a support group around you, you don't create it when you need it. You create it now, and it'll be there when you need it. The 5th thing is leading an integrated life. There's no such thing as perfect balance in your life. I'm sure much of the time you feel like you're working way too many hours. You don't have enough time for your families. There are other times, like when my wife had breast cancer, you're spending more time with your family. I would not try to shoot for perfect balance in life. What I'd try to shoot for is leading your life with the integrity that you can be the same person in every environment you're in. You can be the same person at work, at home, in your personal life, in your community. And if you can be that, I was anything but that in my 30s. I was on to make it work, getting very engaged in the community, and kind of a laid-back guy at home. And I finally decided to decompartmentalize my life by knocking down all the walls and just being the same person. And if people didn't like that person, then tough, But if you can be that same person, then you're really leading your life with integrity. You're leading an integrated life. And I think that's key. And I think you'll be a better leader when you do that. I think you'll be a better leader for the people. Leadership is not about how many hours you work. It's the wisdom of the decisions you make and the people you work with. Well, those 5 things, self-awareness, practicing your values under pressure, working in your sweet spot of motivated capabilities, having a support team, and leading an integrated life are really key to being a leader. Then I think you're in a position to be that empowering leader that leads with a sense of purpose. You all have a clear mission and a sense of purpose here. Are you that empowering leader? One of the most empowering leaders I know is Andrea Jung, who is CEO of Avon, and she has the largest extended organization in the world, 6 million people she's responsible for. Now, most of these are Avon sales reps all around the world. There's 1 million of them in Brazil, there's 600,000 in China, they're growing to 1 million there. Andrea started out as a superstar. She's a Chinese-Canadian immigrant that family moved to Boston. She went through Princeton in 3 years. She became executive vice president at Neiman Marcus in the retail field. At age 31, age 35, she walked out the door without another job. And so she came to my classroom. I said, Andrea, tell us all, why did you quit at 35 without another job? Looked like you're going to be CEO of Neiman Marcus. She said, yeah, that was the problem. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life making luxury goods for upper-class women. So 9 months later, she bounced and landed at Avon, and there she found her passion, not in cosmetics, but in the empowerment of women. Really an interesting story. And she did really well at Avon. At 39, she was in line to be CEO, and they passed her over and went to some guy from the board who'd been in the Duracell battery business and made him the CEO. She was going to quit. It was all over the newspapers. She had lots of offers. And one of her board members pulled her aside and said, Andrea, remember this, follow your compass and not your clock. So if you don't remember anything else from this talk, remember that advice from Ann Moore, follow your compass and not your clock. What it means is you don't have to get to a certain point in life. Life is long at a certain time in your life. What's really important is you're going the direction that's right for you, and you stay true to that direction. Even though life may take many bends, you're still true to what you want to be in your life. And so Andrea did. She stuck around. And 2 years later, the guy had to resign under pressure, and so she became the CEO. The first thing she did was change the mission of the company from cosmetics to the empowerment of women. And she said, today, nothing gives me a greater thrill than going to Indonesia to sales meetings, see these beautiful dresses people make for themselves, or going down the Amazon in a skiff with an Avon sales representative and having an opportunity to take retail to the people in the rural areas. And she said, you know, if I don't have a passion for this business, I can't be a leader. Is that true for you? Do you have a real passion for the business? Can you really lead people unless you have that kind of passion that Andrea has? And she's an incredibly empowering leader for people throughout the organization because she has that sense of passion. So let me just conclude by asking you to think about the end of your life, something you probably don't want to think about, and think about now the legacy you're going to lead. So you're in your late 90s, maybe you're over 100, you've got a couple hours to live, and your family is gathered around, all your children and your grandchildren, and your favorite granddaughter looks up at you and says, Grandma or Grandpa, what did you do to make a difference in the world? What are you going to tell her? I hope you won't tell her that you worked so hard she never has to work a day in her life like you did. But I hope you will tell her what was really important in your life, because that's the legacy you're going to leave behind in this world. Theodore Roosevelt has a wonderful speech he gave many, many years ago at the Sorbonne, which he said is not the critic that counts, not the person who criticizes how the strong man stumbled or how the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit actually belongs to the person who's in the arena, whose face is covered with blood and sweat and dust, who knows the great devotions, the great passions, and knows the triumph of high achievement. And if he fails, at least he fails by daring greatly, so that his place will never be known with those cold and timid souls that know neither victory nor defeat. For me, that really captures the fulfillment of leadership, the joy and thrill of getting together with a group of people, taking on a really tough problem, of hitting barriers, failing, getting off the ground, and coming back and figuring a way through it. That, to me, is really the fulfillment of what leadership is all about. And each of you either called today or you will be called to step up to that kind of leadership and have that opportunity for really the fulfillment of working with a group of people and making a difference in the world through your work. Because at the end of the day, when you do get to that deathbed, the only thing you can take with you is what you leave behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much, Bill. We have time for a couple of questions, and if you would please use the center mic, or if you're VCing in, if you can just raise your voice up, that'd be great. Who has some questions for Bill?
Everything's on the table. Thank you.
Well, I have a question for you. You used HP as an example, and I have experience with HP. And they were known as an innovative company and then have grown very much out of that, it seems, in your example, which I would agree with. What can you see Google doing to avoid that same kind of thing? Because they're in possession of this wonderful innovation now. What idea?
Well, I think the thing, as companies get larger, they tend to get more hierarchical, they get more formal procedures, they try to run more by rules and regs, particularly become more global, and I think that's just the wrong way to run an organization. I believe very much in an engaged style of leadership, where the leaders at all levels have to be out with the troops all the time and be really engaged with them and keep breaking it up into smaller and smaller units. As when units get too large, you have to break them up. That's what Genentech's done so brilliantly with their research, whereas Pfizer has they'll put 500 PhDs in a room. These people are all brilliant, but they all sit there and everyone's afraid to make a mistake. So they get this fear of failure. And I think you have to allow people to fail. You have to create an environment where it's okay to fail and make a mistake. You're not taking the company down, but I think you have to honor that, because in the kind of work you do, things don't always work out. And so I think it's really important to honor the mavericks or the creators or the people who really are innovative, and not just get to a bureaucratic hierarchical model with many levels. So I'm very much a believer in flat organizations and breaking in lots of little units. But that takes a lot more work on the part of the leaders to get out there with them, and you have to trust people. And if you don't have people you can trust, and frankly, I think you have to move people out who are what I call the kiss up, kick down types. They look really good to the bosses, and people really, are just horrible to work for, and no one wants to work for them. That's why I think 360 feedback or honest feedback is really critical from your subordinates. I learned a lot more from feedback from my subordinates than I ever learned from my bosses.
Sure. Thank you very much for coming today. It was great to hear from you. I have a question. You've been exposed to a lot of different companies and industries. What models have you seen that have been successful rewarding and incenting managers to be excellent managers and leaders?
Good feedback from their subordinates. Not just the numbers. If you play it just by the numbers, you're going to get the numbers, but the numbers, the best way in a high-tech company to make the numbers is cut back on creativity, research, people development, marketing, going into new territories, trying new things. And so I think it's really important not to have a model where you reward too much in the short term. That's what happened to all the big New York banks, is they're rewarding in the short-term performance and let people walk away in cash. I think it's far better to look at I got to the point where I'd never promote someone at Medtronic because I made a lot of mistakes. I wouldn't promote them until I got feedback from their subordinates and how they felt about them. Now, as CEO, I couldn't wander around and say, what do you think about this person? I had to there are other ways I had to get it, either through formal mechanisms like 360 or, informal networking through the human resource department to find out how they're seen as leaders. And if you listen to that and not look at how impressive they are or how people present themselves at high levels, I think you do have a much better success ratio in promoting people. And frankly, I think, as an organization grows, you have to get rid of the bad apples too. Mm-hmm. And I know this organization probably feels like it doesn't have any bad apples or has trouble getting rid of them. I think you actually have to find a way for them to go away. Because if they will destroy a culture. People that are cynical, negative, don't really buy into what the organization's trying to do. Frankly, at a certain point in time, if they can't buy into it, it's just better they go away. I used to tell people, if that's your objectives, you can make them a lot more money at Merrill Lynch than you'll ever make here. And so that's hard. We brought a guy in from Pfizer to head up Europe, and he was very political, a very talented guy, and I had to sit with him 3 times. I said, Barry, this doesn't work at Medtronic. This is not the way we do it here. And eventually Barry had to go away because he couldn't adapt. And so I think in that point, leadership has to be fairly aggressive in making sure you got the right people on the team. Thank you.
Gopi, last question.
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you for coming again.
Thank you.
So I understand from my brother who hosted you at a Wharton Leadership Conference once that your style apparently comes in all of your thinking has emerged from 30 years of daily meditation, contemplative practice, and going to retreats, etc. And I'm curious about that aspect because Google is a very conscious community. There are a lot of practitioners here. There's many things offered formally. So I want you to talk for a few minutes about how that practice in your daily life has actually led to who you are now.
Well, as you could probably tell from my comments, I was pretty fast moving in my 20s and 30s, and I also was very aggressive and very direct, and so I was very goal oriented, and I could get to the point where I go to the office ready to tear somebody apart because they weren't really committed to making the goals that I thought were so important. And I took this meditation class. Frankly, it was one weekend. It took about 2 hours on Saturday and 2 hours Sunday. So it was transcendental meditation from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So it was not, it was not a complex process. But I've been meditating ever since, and it really helps calm me. And two things it does for me: it keeps me focused on what's really important. Okay, because I tend to carry a lot of balls in my work up in the air, and I don't want to let any of them drop, but I start to think I confuse the little things with the big things, and it helps me focus on what's really important and not worry about a lot of the distractors. We go through the day and there are a lot of distractors, a lot of what I call incomplete interactions. A phone call we didn't return, a conversation in the hall that's disturbing to me but I can't address on some email someone sent me I'm worried about but I don't have time for. I think we have to clear our head. Meditation helps me clear my head of those things. And then if you get to be a really good meditator, far better than I am, I think you can reach a level of clarity about what's really important. And all my creativity comes post-meditation. I can't describe how it happened. It's not a religious practice in any way for me, but I can't describe how it happens, but I think I get much greater clarity about creativity and what's important, and I'm able to put things together in a much better context. Now, my wife, post-breast cancer, has given up her practice of psychology, and she's working on medicine now, mind, body, heart, and spirit. And one of the things they're doing is not just, she said, I don't want you to look at me as a diseased breast just because I had breast cancer and had a mastectomy. I want you to look at me as a whole person. But I think how you get this kind of, whether you do it through things like jogging, walking, going to a good movie and laughing, but I think we need stress release and we need some ways to gain clarity. And they're also finding in medicine that you'll be much healthier in this way. And they're allowing people to go into surgery with guided imagery, to come out and have meditation, to have acupuncture, anything to relieve the kind of stress and let the body's natural healing take place. So I think it's both true in leadership and in human health, and I think the two are not that far apart. I used to say to the health providers in Medtronic, we're not interested in lowest costs. We're not actually doing. We want a health plan that will enable our employees to be fully present on the job every day. So if you're clinically depressed, we want you to get help. If you have a sick child, we want you to get help. So,
Thank you.
Good.
Bill, on behalf of Google, thank you so
Good.
very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Nice to be here. Thank you.